G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program. And I have to tell you, first up, it is bloody great to be able to speak again. I think I'm still a little crackly, so apologise for that, but I can talk properly now, which is nice. So, we're going to pick this up exactly where we left off. Jebediah Kerman has just finished doing all of his science experiments in this location on the Mun, and we are just getting ready to board our rocket and depart back to Kerbal. Now, as you'll recall from the last KSP video, this mission was actually incredibly important. The completion of this mission will finally give us enough money to upgrade the vehicle assembly building, allowing us to start building substantially larger and more powerful rockets and to travel further into the Kerbal system. It's just lucky technology-wise, we've pretty much maxed out the first generation of rockets and what they can do, and we've made missions to the Mun practically routine. This return is going to be just as easy as the landing was. So, 1/3 thrust, get a little bit of altitude, tilt 45 west, make sure you retract your landing gear on the way up, and just slowly let the altitude climb out. Once you've got a little bit up here, we're going to tinker with the maneuver node. I don't really need to, but I'm going to use it because I want to make sure I get a very accurate single burn to re-entry. So yes, this is going to be a 1 burn return. We're going to hit this maneuver node, power through, and aim at about a 30-kilometer periapsis in the Kerbal atmosphere. From that point, whatever fuel we've got left, we'll burn, jettison the external tanks, and ride the pod into the ground. All the science has already been transferred into the command pod, so we don't have to worry about playing around in space to transfer any of that. It'll just be get to Kerbal, enter the atmosphere, burn the fuel, dump the tanks, and ride the thermal shockwave all the way to the ground. Now, I'm leaving a lot of my maneuver node adjustments in the video. I've actually had a lot of questions asking how I set up my maneuver nodes. They're not actually overly complicated, it's something you just need to have a bit of a play with. Remember, the green line is your prograde and retrograde burn. The blue maneuver nodes adjust your angle of attack from center on the horizontal plane. The purple ones adjust exactly the same on the vertical plane. So with that, all of our maneuver planning is actually set and programmed in, and this will be the last actual burn we have to pull off in order to hit Kerbal orbit. So we just line her up and wait. Of course, I'm not going to make you wait that long. So that's the burn complete, so let's see how we did. Alright, we're looking pretty good on this. Oh, hang on. 119 kilometers. That's a little higher than I anticipated. I actually think I overcooked the burn a little bit here, so I may need to do a final adjustment burn. Just quickly looking over my Kerbal Flight Engineer, checking out exactly how much fuel I have left and whether or not I've got enough to be able to last-ditch burn into the atmosphere. So, easiest way to check, I know how much delta V I've got left in the tanks now. Just quickly create a move and maneuver node. Now, I'm not planning on using this one, I just want to see exactly how much fuel it's going to take. And as you can see, it's going to easily pass out in excess of what I've got in the tanks to burn at this point. Now, this is the silly and inefficient way of doing it, but it would have made for a rather spectacular re-entry. But I don't have enough fuel for that, so of course, the easiest way to deal with this is to just make an adjustment burn on the other end. Now, I don't even really need a maneuver node for this. Just set the Kerbal autopilot. Just a very short burn. There we go, 26 kilometers in the atmosphere. That will do nicely. So yes, a slight adjustment was needed. If I had been doing this right, I actually should have been on the map view for the last few seconds of the burn, with my cursor over the periapsis marker and my finger on the kill engine button. I should have been monitoring those last few meters all on my own. But that's why I build my rockets with an excess reserve of fuel, just in case you need to perform an extra burn that you did not have planned. That's the whole point about trying to keep a little bit extra in the fuel tank. If you're running on vapors when you return home, you may, or out of fuel completely, reliant entirely on a perfect burn from the Mun all the way back into Kerbal orbit with nothing in excess, you're cutting it a little too fine. So about 20 minutes later, and we're slowly descending towards the atmosphere of Kerbal. Currently sitting at about 250,000 kilometers and descending extremely rapidly. We are at 3-speed time acceleration at the moment. We'll be dropping back that just a moment so I can prepare to burn the last of the fuel in the tanks. Commencing the burn, and this will not take long. There isn't a lot of fuel left in these tanks. I estimate we've got probably 10 or 15 seconds at maximum. Tanks emptied and jettisoned. Line up on the retrograde marker. Just going to carefully get this one in line. Now, I only use the SAS during the initial part of the descent, and that's because I'm still a little paranoid about these pods. When 1.1 first went live, these pods were incredibly unstable as they were going through the thermal shockwave on re-entry. It was a weight distribution problem in the pods itself, and I believe it's been repaired, but I still have obsessive compulsive over making sure the SAS is active during that shockwave. Once you get through it, it doesn't really matter all that much. Now, we're descending incredibly quickly down here. We're down to 38 kilometers already and falling fast, and here we go. As always, I like to monitor the ablatives during descent. It doesn't really make much of a difference. At this point, the pod's either going to survive or it's not, but there's absolutely nothing I can do to the controls to save it. But I like to watch the ablator run down anyway. In this case, I'm also watching the electrical charge gauge, because when that hits 0, the SAS disables. Now, that explosion you heard in the background just then was actually the fuel tank disintegrating on re-entry. And there we are, we're clear of the shockwave, and we get to begin the fun and extremely long free fall all the way down to 2 kilometers from 14 kilometers. Parachute ejection at 3.3. They drogue all the way down to around about 2 or just under 2 kilometers where they deploy, and after that we are safe as houses. Jebediah Kerman has once again managed to safely return home from the Mun. Not that there was ever a huge amount of doubt. First generation rockets, small first gen rockets, and trips to the Mun really are routine once you get used to how they work. You can perform the same burn without maneuver nodes, and you can safely hit the Mun every single time with the most primitive of rockets. I've seen people manage to pull off Mun landings using nothing but RCS. And with that parachute deployment, this is mission complete. So, back in Kerbal Space Center, and the goal for this entire mission, to finally upgrade the VAB. The upgrade will jump us from a maximum of 30 parts to a maximum of 255, and give us access to action groups, allowing me to start automating certain sections of my rockets. And there we have it, what is possibly the most important upgrade to our KSP career. So with the VAB upgraded, what the hell do we do with it? Well, thankfully the mission system has given us access to a mission that I actually wasn't planning on performing for some time yet, as I don't have access to the right parts. Kerbal Systems wants us to build a base on the Mun. Now this is a heavy lifting mission. The Prerequisites for this particular mission is the base must be able to carry up to 8 Kerbals on its own. It doesn't say you have to put 8 Kerbals up there, it just needs to be capable of housing 8 Kerbals. The base needs to have its own docking port, it needs to be able to generate its own power, and it needs to have access to its own radio. But as I said before, I don't actually have access to the science tech nodes for building bases at this time. So I've got to build this using just lunar and command module command pods in order to get the housing. I don't even have access to one of the large hitchhiker containers at this point. Now, under normal circumstances, what I would do is give you a very, very, very extremely time accelerated look at the construction process, and we'll jump straight through to the finished product. This time I'm going to do it the other way around. You're going to get a good look at the finished product right at the end, but I'm actually going to run a still time accelerated but much slower time accelerated version of the build, and I'm going to talk you through it. Now, this build is running at about 4 times speed at the moment. So the first part I looked at, I flicked through a couple of the various command modules, and I settled on this one as the base canopy, or the base capsule, for the core of my main lander that will become my base. These capsules are not designed for re-entry, they're actually designed to be extra space for a command module. And so they're not designed to land at all, they're not designed to encounter atmosphere. But the Mun doesn't have an atmosphere, it's in vacuum, so that doesn't really matter. And they seat 3 crew members each, so 2 of these on top of one another fit 6. Then I'm going to fit the Odin landing capsule on top, that gives me another 2, that brings me up to my 8. 4 batteries mounted around the top of the lower can in the gap seemed the easiest place to put a set of batteries. That gives me a little bit of electrical charge. 4 batteries should be enough to retain power during the entire flight. Now, solar panels. At the moment I don't have generators, I don't have anything fold out, so I've got to use these panels here, which were designed originally for landers. Now, the original intention was to cover the entire top of the landing probe with these panels because they don't generate a lot of electrical charge each. Keep them all directed towards the sun during the flight, and when I land, I'm going to land on the side facing Kerbal, which will give me a fair amount of sunlight. That side sees quite a bit. Now, I had to use tweak scale to adjust the size of my fuel tanks just a little bit. I want to keep them all in line, as I don't want there to be excess drag from the flat panels. Ferrum Aerospace will model that, so if I try and keep them nice and close together and all in line, nothing too large or sticking out, we should be good. Next up, I fit the microchip that gives you access to all of the Kerbal engineer stats. I want this fitted to this spacecraft, as this thing is going to be very uncomfortable to land. Every time I've done a lunar base in the past, I've split it up into multiple modules, so there might be 2 crew modules that land that give up the crew count for the base. That's not an option with this mission. Everything that was listed as a mission objective needs to be on the single lander that I drop down, so I can't split this mission into 2 or 3 landings. I've got to do it in one. This thing's going to be really big, and I don't really have access to the tech to do this yet. So, tweak scale the engine as well, and then put the landing legs on. I want to have the landing legs mounted as high up the sides of the rocket as I possibly can, so it lowers the center of mass as close to the ground as I possibly can during landings. I need this thing to be fairly stable. Well, as stable as something that is an engine, a fuel tank, and 3 command capsules tall can be during a landing. Now, on top of the fuel tank, I did fit an extra SAS control. This is because the only one of these 3 command pods that does have SAS capability is the one at the top, the 2-man pod, and it's nowhere near powerful enough to hold the rest of this behemoth together. So the extra SAS will allow control. Now, this is where I suddenly ran into a problem. I don't have access to a fairing base at the 2 meter range yet. I've only got small 1 meter probe sized or very small 1st gen rocket sized fairing bases. Now, normally you can get around this by using tweak scale to adjust the size of one of your smaller parts, but in this particular case I can't. Tweak scale actually has limitations on the fairing bases. You need access to the higher level ones, and that's a major issue because those solar panels are incredibly light. If they're on the nose of the rocket while the rocket is pushing through the air during takeoff, they're all going to get ripped off, so I needed to come up with a way of keeping them safe. Now, I was a little worried about potentially a thermal shock wave on the front of this thing as well, and I didn't want anything getting damaged because I have to have antennas on this yet, and there is those solar panels. But the requirements for the mission did say that I needed a docking port, so if I fit 1 docking port on, mount a second one the other way around, and then mount a heat shield on the top, the heat shield will prevent anything underneath from being damaged during takeoff, even if we get up to the kind of speeds where we can get a plasma wake. It should also save the antennas from most of the aerodynamic effects. That was at least until I was taking a look at this and realised that these antennas are just too big and I can't use the small ones. I need something that's powerful enough to hit Kerbal. Thankfully, I had one available. These fold-outs are much sleeker, they fit against the side of the fuselage just nicely, and they'll snap out when we actually get to our destination. Beautiful. So, that's the landing core solved. All it means is once I actually clear the atmosphere and get into space, I have to jettison that heat shield and then maneuver the rocket out of the way so I can get ready to perform my lunar transfer burn. Okay, so with the lander complete, now we actually have to build the rocket that's going to get us to the Mun. So straight away, we need big 2-meter fuel tanks. We've got to go large. We need a lot of fuel for the core section. This lander is incredibly heavy. Because I don't have access to the lightweight components that I would normally use when constructing a lunar base, this is a really heavy payload, so I'm going to have to be a little obscene with the fuel. So basic control surfaces, I've got a large Bearcat engine on the bottom that has gimbaling, which should allow me all the control I need to keep this big monstrosity under control, but will it have enough fuel to do the job on its own? Now initially I didn't think so, and I was looking at my old trick of just wax SRBs on the side of it, and that should be all you need. I actually don't need incredibly huge SRBs on this one, so I was looking at one that was considerably smaller than what I would normally use on my Gen 1 rockets. These SRBs, they're just to get the mass of the ship moving. Then I was sort of watching the Delta V stats the whole time during this build, and I wasn't liking the numbers that are coming up. It's potentially it could work, but it's borderline. It's one of those, rockets that I'm not entirely sure if it's going to make it to the Mun, or if it's going to run out of fuel during the final descent to the surface of the Mun. That's when I come up with a new idea. I remembered that I now have access to fuel transfer cables. So what I'm going to do is put a large liquid fuel boosters on the outside, but put fuel transfer cables in, or fuel transfer conduits, that are transferring fuel from the outer rockets, or the outer liquid boosters, into the core fuel tank during the entirety of the launch. Now what this means is the 4 outer fuel tanks that you see will burn out of fuel very, very, very quickly. Likely the rocket's not going to get any higher than around 20 to maybe 30 kilometers before those big double tank liquid fuel rockets, which are incredibly expensive, are completely out of fuel. But when they run out of fuel and are jettisoned, the rocket loses the weight of them, and the core engine, 2 tanks on top of that Bearcat, will still be at full fuel. This should be more than enough fuel to get the lander all the way into space and to make the transfer to the Mun. All that was left at this point was to attach the scaffolding and we're ready to go, except for one small problem. I only have 66,000 credits and the rocket costs 77. So, there's nothing here I can really afford to take off if I want this rocket to work. I don't really have access to the lightweight parts I need just yet in order to be able to send a base to space at a cheaper cost. So, what do? Well, you take a leaf out of the book of government and big business and you embezzle the money from another project. I noticed when I accepted the mission to build the lunar base, there was actually another mission there for mining ore on the surface of the Mun and bringing it back to Kerbal that paid out 140,000 credits in advance. That'll do. And there she is, possibly the ugliest rocket that I have ever built before. But, will she do the job? You'll have to tune in next episode to find out. Until next time, click like if you do, subscribe if you want to see more. Fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in orbit.